Rogue is a platformer game I've been working on for the past 1 month, and boy, I cannot wait to share with you guys how I built it. I started off with the basics. I added a player, which is a square, very nice. I added some gravity and a floor for it to land on. Guess what? I did all this on the first try. Next, I added the movement controls. Up arrow to jump up, left arrow to move to the left, while the right arrow, you are never going to guess what the right arrow does. Wait for it. It moves to the right.
Well, no fucking shit.
Since we're building the platformer game, there was still something key I needed to add. Platforms? Exactly. So I added platforms. Very nice. All that's left is to add some physics. Usually people tend to use physics engines when working with games like this, so they can spend less time working on the mechanics and more on the game itself. But I have pride, and I wasn't going to sit down and build my very first original game using someone else's engine. I mean, why would I spend a few minutes reading documentations when I can spend hours of my time writing the whole thing myself? I'm joking. I honestly just thought this was good practice. Now, the physics of the game comprises of 3 major factors: gravity, the velocity of the player, and collisions. Just like in real life. Wait, sorry, could you zoom in a bit more? Alright, thank you. Where was I? Just like in real life, the gravity has to be a constant variable. What goes up must come down. The velocity of the player, on the other hand, represents the speed at which the player moves, and it consists of the x and y velocity. If we want the player to move left, we give the x velocity a negative value. If we want it to move to the right, we give it a positive value. The y velocity, however, does pretty much the same thing. The difference is the player can only go up, which means its values can only be less than or equal to 0. And this is where the gravity kicks in, because it sets a limit to how high the player can go. Once it reaches that limit, it falls back down. Collisions. This, in my opinion, is where the beauty of the physics shows, because now we're just simply checking if the player collides with any solid object. If it collides with the top or bottom of the object, you set the y velocity to 0. If it collides with the sides of the object, you set the x velocity to 0. Alright, that's the whole physics. Took me about 5 hours to get this part done. Now, if life was all about physics and platforms, we would be done. But sadly, that is not the case, because there's still an important feature we are yet to implement: camera movement. So obviously, our game is going to go beyond the borders of the canvas, so we're going to need some kind of camera mechanism to explore other parts of the map. Modern generation platformers built using game engines have this already as an inbuilt feature, where you just simply place a camera to follow the player around. But since I'm coding from scratch, I sadly do not have this privilege, so I had to go the traditional ET style of game development, where you simply check if the player is at the center of the screen, and if it is, we stop the player's movement and move the background instead to the opposite direction. As simple as it sounds, it's actually just as simple to implement. It took me about 10 lines of code and only 1 bag of chips. At this point, I had finished implementing the structure of the game, so it was finally time to put my art skills to use and actually start designing stuff. My pixel art skills are honestly not the best, mostly due to my lack of experience, but with enough determination and of course hours of watching YouTube tutorials, I don't know, I feel I was able to pull off something decent. So I started off with designing our character. I also added a standing, strike and running animation for it. Once I was satisfied with that, I moved on to designing the platforms. Aside the player and the platforms, I spent some time adding more props to the game, like doors, gates, pillars, poison liquids, spikes, torches, coins, and of course the enemy. The enemy, just like our player, also has a walk, stand and strike animation. The enemy of course will be controlled using AI, and by AI I mean highly sophisticated if statements. Now, how the AI works is simply by using something I call detection range, which is basically the areas the player has to be in order to alert the enemy. Once the enemy is alerted, it checks to see which of the sides the player is located. If it's at the left, it triggers the walking animation and gives its x velocity a negative value, making it move to the left, and vice versa. The final stage is encountering the player, which is simply checking if it has reached the X position of the player added with the player's weight. The same also applies if the player is at the right side, only that instead of adding the weight of the player, you subtract it instead. Once it has encountered the player, it then triggers the strike animation. Of course, the process of coding this was far from being as smooth as I just explained. There were a lot of stupid cases where the enemy just stops moving for no goddamn reason, even though all the conditions have been met. So I had to check for a lot of other stuffs, and it was honestly just a tough bridge to cross. But in the end, I managed to get it working with about 90% efficiency. By 90% efficiency, I mean that there are still some bugs, but they are very minimal that you probably wouldn't notice it. Okay, with that out of the way, I started working on the game's level. Since it's the first one, I decided not to go too crazy and just make it hard enough to get you used to the feel of the game. Next, I needed sound effects, so I looked up in the internet for them and downloaded the best ones I could find, and also added some music. And then finally, last but not least, the UI contains the play. I also added the settings menu to display the settings of the game. Yeah, no shit. And that's it, pretty much. Awesome, I had a lot of fun working on this project. I spent about 3 or 4 weeks working on it from start to finish. I'm sure if you're not new here, you probably noticed I made an upgrade to my character. The previous one was getting kind of old and honestly it wasn't looking that aesthetically pleasing. Dude, I'm right here. Yeah, sorry buddy. So yeah, depending on how well this video does, I might make a part 2 where I make more levels and probably add some more stuff to the game. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I also recently opened a Twitter account where I'll be posting some extra stuff like updates on videos, some memes, and very strong opinions on topics that people don't give a shit about. So yeah, if you're interested, go give a follow. I'll be following the first 10 people back. Alright, that's it for the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Oh, stop. You're making me blush.